Blood dripped from Jasmine Winters' finger onto the white wedding dress. The prestigious Montgomery hotel ballroom fell silent as the bride screamed at the dirty black help. 24 hours later, that same bride's father would be begging on his knees for Jasmine's forgiveness. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and transformation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe kindness can change lives even in the face of racism. Are you ready to see how a single act of compassion led to the most unexpected revenge story of the year? Jasmine Winters pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders as the bitter Vermont wind whipped through the streets of Pinewood Falls. At 23 years old, she possessed a talent with needle and thread that bordered on magical. Yet here she was, trudging through 6 inches of snow to reach Elegance Bridal before her 8 a.m. shift. The predominantly white town had never fully embraced her presence, something she felt with each passing glance and whispered comment as she made her way down Main Street. Elegance Bridal was owned by Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a pinch-faced woman who had recognized Jasmine's exceptional talent 4 years ago, but paid her minimum wage while charging premium prices for her handiwork. Today would be like any other day. Jasmine would arrive, slip in through the back entrance as instructed, and begin working on the pile of alterations that somehow always belonged exclusively to her workload. She had learned early on that customers at Elegance preferred not to see her handling their precious wedding gowns and formal wear. "Could someone else work on my dress?" was a request she'd heard countless times, always followed by uncomfortable glances at her dark skin. Even when customers praised her work, they rarely acknowledged that she had done it, preferring to thank Eleanor directly. The worst part was watching her designs get stolen by her white colleagues. Just last month, Jasmine had sketched a stunning bridesmaid collection that Eleanor had presented as her own creation to a wealthy client. The bonus from that sale had gone to Eleanor's daughter, who worked part-time at the shop and could barely thread a needle. Jasmine passed Sullivan's Bank on her route, the same institution that had rejected her loan application 3 times despite her perfect credit score and detailed business plan for Winters Designs, the boutique she dreamed of opening. The loan officer had smiled sympathetically while explaining they were looking for more established business owners, though she'd later learned that Tommy Fletcher, who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, had secured funding for his 3rd failed business venture. Jasmine's apartment was in the oldest section of town, a brick building with unreliable heating that left her wearing layers indoors throughout the harsh winter months. Her grandmother, the woman who had taught her to sew, would have been heartbroken to see how her granddaughter struggled. Grandma Eliza had passed down techniques that had been in their family for generations, skills that had been denied recognition and fair compensation since her great-great-grandmother had sewn for wealthy white families during Reconstruction. "Your hands carry our history," Grandma Eliza used to say. Every stitch is an act of resistance. Jasmine's morning routine rarely varied. She would wake before sunrise, sketch designs by the weak light of dawn, then walk past the row of luxury boutiques where her creations would never be displayed. Today, she stopped at Harvest Beans, where her best friend Maya Chen worked the morning shift. Maya was the daughter of Chinese immigrants who owned the town's only authentic Asian restaurant, and one of the few people in Pinewood Falls who understood what it meant to be constantly treated as an outsider. "You look like you need this more than I do," Maya said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. "On the house." Jasmine accepted gratefully, knowing her bank account held exactly $35 until payday next week. That morning, she'd received notice that her rent would increase by $100 starting next month, an impossible sum to produce from her already stretched budget. "Any word on the Thompson wedding alterations?" Maya asked, knowing this was the most prestigious event in town this season. "Eleanor gave me the assignment yesterday," Jasmine replied, unable to keep the exhaustion from her voice. "Everything needs to be ready by tomorrow for the final fitting." What Jasmine didn't mention was that Eleanor had assigned her all 6 bridesmaids' dresses, the mother of the bride's gown, and last-minute adjustments to the wedding dress itself, a workload that would keep her at the shop until midnight at least. The Montgomery family was Pinewood Falls' version of royalty. Old money, Old power and old prejudices ran through their bloodline as surely as their signature blonde hair and blue eyes. Having their wedding at the Montgomery Hotel would bring enormous prestige to Elegance Bridal, and Eleanor had made it abundantly clear that Jasmine's continued employment depended on absolute perfection. As Jasmine pushed open the back door of the shop, Eleanor was already waiting, arms crossed and lips pursed. The bride called. "She wants an additional layer of beading on the bodice. I told her you'd have it done by tomorrow." Jasmine nodded, knowing that arguing was pointless. Her fingers would bleed tonight, but the work would be flawless, not that anyone would ever know it was hers. The clock struck midnight as Jasmine knotted the final thread on the Montgomery wedding dress. Her fingers were raw and bloody from hours of meticulous beadwork, but the result was breathtaking, a cascade of pearls and crystals that caught the light like morning dew. Eleanor had left hours ago, leaving Jasmine to close up the shop with strict instructions to set the alarm and deposit the key through the mail slot. "Don't you dare take that dress home," Eleanor had warned. "It stays in the showroom where it's safe." The implication that Jasmine might somehow soil or steal the precious garment hung in the air long after Eleanor's departure. Outside, a fierce snowstorm had transformed Pinewood Falls into a winter nightmare. Jasmine pulled her inadequate coat around her shoulders and began the mile-long trek to her apartment, the wind slicing through her layers like razor blades. Her usual route took her past the closed storefronts of Main Street, all darkened now except for the 24-hour pharmacy at the corner. As she passed Mitchell's restaurant, a huddled figure in the doorway caught her attention. An elderly white woman, frail and shaking, was pressed against the glass door, seeking minimal shelter from the driving snow. Jasmine hesitated. Previous experiences offering help to white residents of Pinewood Falls had taught her painful lessons. Just last month, she'd offered to help Mrs. Patterson with her groceries, only to be accused of attempted theft. The old woman was dressed in clothing too light for the weather, a thin sweater and slacks with leather shoes now soaked through with slush. No hat, no gloves, no proper coat. Despite her reservations, Jasmine couldn't walk past. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she called, keeping a cautious distance. The woman looked up, her face etched with confusion and fatigue. Her pale blue eyes seemed unfocused, and a thin wisp of white hair had escaped from her otherwise neat bun. "I was waiting for the bus to Mapleton," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong despite her fragile appearance, "but I think I might be turned around." Jasmine frowned. Mapleton was 30 miles away, and the last bus had departed hours ago. This woman was clearly disoriented. "The buses aren't running anymore tonight," Jasmine explained gently. "It's after midnight, and there's a snowstorm. Do you have someone I can call for you?" The woman shook her head, confusion crossing her features. "I don't remember the number. Richard usually handles these things for me." Jasmine knew the only place still open would be Harvest Beans, which stayed open until 2 a.m. on weekends for the college students from Pinewood Community College. "There's a coffee shop down the street. We could go there to warm up and figure out what to do. Would that be okay?" The woman, who eventually introduced herself as Martha, nodded gratefully. As they entered Harvest Beans, Jasmine felt the familiar weight of stares. The late-night crowd, mostly white students and a few townies, watched as she guided Martha to a booth near the back. Maya was working the late shift and raised an eyebrow at Jasmine, silently questioning the situation. "Could we get 2 coffees and some soup if you have it?" Jasmine asked. Martha looked around the coffee shop with vague interest. "My son used to visit a place like this in this town," she remarked. "He always said they made the best apple pie." Jasmine nodded politely, wondering how much of Martha's recollection was accurate given her apparent confusion. The manager hovered nearby, watching Jasmine with thinly veiled suspicion. She recognized him as Derek Thompson, Eleanor's nephew, who had never bothered to hide his disdain for Jasmine's presence in his town. When Maya brought their order, Jasmine pulled out her wallet. $35, all she had until payday, would just cover their meal. Martha ate her soup slowly, but with apparent appetite. As she warmed up, more details emerged. She was Martha Richards, 82 years old, and had been trying to visit someone in Pinewood Falls when she'd become confused about her location. "My son will be worried," she said between sips. He's a good boy, very successful now. He'd be angry knowing I'm out alone like this. As the night grew later, Jasmine faced a dilemma. Martha clearly had nowhere to go, and the temperature outside continued to drop. "Is there a shelter in town?" Martha asked, surprising Jasmine with her directness. Pinewood Falls did have a small community shelter, though Jasmine knew it would likely be at capacity on such a bitter night. "Let me call them," she offered. The shelter confirmed her suspicions. They were full due to the storm. Jasmine made a decision then that would change her life forever, though she couldn't have known it at the time. "Martha, I don't live far from here. It's not much, but I have a warm place you can stay tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out how to contact your son." Martha studied Jasmine's face with surprising clarity. "You'd do that for a stranger? An old white woman you just met?" The directness of the question startled Jasmine. "I'd do it for anyone stuck in a snowstorm," she replied honestly. As they prepared to leave, Martha shivered despite the coffee shop's warmth. Without hesitation, Jasmine unwrapped her own scarf, a beautiful hand-knitted piece her grandmother had made, and wrapped it around Martha's neck. "To keep you warm until we get home," she explained. Martha fingered the colorful yarn with appreciation. "I will return this kindness someday," she said with such certainty that Jasmine felt a strange shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The walk to Jasmine's apartment was slow, but manageable. Once inside, Jasmine gave Martha her bed, taking the lumpy couch for herself. After settling Martha with extra blankets, Jasmine sat at her small kitchen table with a candle for light to save on electricity, and pulled out her emergency sewing kit. Tomorrow was another workday, and she had promised to finish hemming Mrs. Larson's curtains, an under-the-table job that would bring in an extra $20 if she completed it before noon. As the candle flickered and snow continued to fall outside her window, Jasmine had no idea that the simple act of kindness she had shown tonight would forever alter the course of her life. The grand ballroom of the Montgomery Hotel gleamed with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light over silk-draped tables and floral arrangements that cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. She had arrived at 6 a.m., carrying a small emergency kit of thread, needles, and extra beading, prepared for any last-minute disasters that might arise before the 3 p.m. ceremony. Eleanor had greeted her with a terse nod and immediate instructions. "You'll work from the service hallway. If any adjustments are needed, I'll bring the garments to you. Under no circumstances are you to enter the bridal suite or speak directly with any member of the wedding party." Jasmine had expected nothing less, but the sting remained. She had poured her heart and soul into these garments, worked until her fingers bled, yet would remain invisible to those who wore her art. Throughout the morning, Eleanor paraded through the service area with various bridesmaids' dresses needing minor adjustments, a loose strap here, a pinched seam there, nothing that required more than a few minutes of Jasmine's skilled hands. "The Montgomerys are very pleased with my work," Eleanor announced after delivering the fourth bridesmaid dress. Mr. Montgomery specifically mentioned how impressed he was with the beadwork on his daughter's gown. Jasmine bit her tongue, focusing on the delicate silver thread in her needle rather than the injustice of Eleanor's claim. Around noon, fragments of conversation drifted through the service door as the Montgomery family gathered in the ballroom for final venue approval. "The acquisition of the Cedar Street properties is nearly complete," a deep male voice stated. "Once we've cleared those old buildings, construction on the luxury condos can begin by spring." Jasmine's needle paused mid-stitch. Cedar Street ran directly through her neighborhood. Her apartment building was on Maple, just 1 block over. "Any holdouts?" another voice asked. "A few tenants making noise about historical significance and community preservation," the first voice replied with a dismissive laugh. "Nothing our legal team can't handle. Besides, most of those buildings are falling apart. We're doing the town a favor by developing that area." Eleanor reappeared, interrupting Jasmine's eavesdropping with a frantic expression. "The bride wants the waistline taken in another 1/4 inch. She says she's lost weight from pre-wedding stress. You have 30 minutes before she needs to get dressed." The wedding dress was a masterpiece of Jasmine's creation, though officially credited as Eleanor's design. A classic A-line silhouette in Duchess satin with hand-embroidered lace overlay, featuring over 10,000 individually sewn crystal beads that formed a delicate floral pattern across the bodice and train. Taking in the waistline would require removing and reapplying at least 300 beads, a task that should take hours, not minutes. Jasmine worked with focused intensity, her fingers flying as she carefully removed beads, adjusted the seam, and reattached each crystal in its precise position. 28 minutes later, she tied off the final thread and inspected her work. The alteration was flawless, invisible to anyone who hadn't seen the dress before. As she handed the gown back to Eleanor, exhaustion and hunger made her movements slightly less precise than usual. She had missed breakfast to arrive early and had skipped lunch to complete the last-minute alterations. Her fingers slipped against the needle's point, drawing a tiny drop of blood. Before she could react, the crimson bead fell, landing on the very edge of the dress's hem, a barely visible spot on the underside of the innermost layer of tulle. Eleanor whisked the dress away without noticing, leaving Jasmine to apply pressure to her finger and pray the spot wouldn't be discovered. That prayer went unanswered 15 minutes later when a shriek echoed through the entire hotel. "What is this?" The bride's voice carried even through the service door, sharp with outrage. "There's blood on my dress." Jasmine felt her stomach drop as the service door burst open, revealing Vanessa Montgomery in her satin robe, face contorted with rage, holding the dress with 2 fingers as though it were contaminated. Behind her stood Eleanor, pale-faced and trembling. "You," Vanessa pointed at Jasmine. "You ruined my wedding dress. You put your disgusting blood on my gown." The ballroom fell silent as all eyes turned toward the service hallway. "I can fix it," Jasmine began, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. "It's just a tiny spot on the underside of the hem. No one would ever see. I don't care if no one can see it." Vanessa cut her off, voice rising to a shriek. "I'll know it's there. That dirty black help bled on my wedding dress." The slur hung in the air like poison gas. Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between Jasmine and the bride. "Vanessa, dear, I completely understand your distress. This is absolutely unacceptable. I'll handle this situation immediately." She turned to Jasmine, her expression cold. "You're fired. Leave the premises immediately." "But I—" Jasmine began. "Security!" Eleanor called, and within moments, 2 large men in black suits appeared. "Please escort this woman out through the service entrance. She is no longer employed by Elegance Bridal." The security guards gripped Jasmine's arms firmly enough to leave bruises, marching her through the back hallways and kitchen as staff stopped to stare. They deposited her unceremoniously in the alley behind the hotel, where 1 guard remained to ensure she didn't attempt to re-enter the building. Humiliated and shaking, Jasmine walked home in a daze. She had been publicly degraded, lost her job, and wouldn't even receive payment for the past 2 weeks of grueling work. When she finally reached her apartment, she discovered Martha was gone. In her place was a neatly folded note that simply read, "Thank you for your kindness, M.R." The final blow came in the form of an official letter that had been slipped under her door during her absence. "Notice of eviction," the heading proclaimed in bold letters. The property had been sold to Montgomery Development Corporation, and all current leases would terminate in 30 days to make way for planned renovations. Jasmine sank to the floor, the eviction notice in one hand and Martha's note in the other. Around her were scattered sketches for Winters' designs, her dream that now seemed further away than ever before. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Jasmine allowed herself to consider giving up. Maybe she should leave Pinewood Falls, abandon her designs, find some anonymous job in a big city where she could disappear into the background. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance rather than your abilities? Comment number 1. If you've experienced discrimination in the workplace, like Jasmine. It's heartbreaking how a single moment can destroy someone's livelihood and sense of self-worth, isn't it? Like this video if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their skin color. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming injustice. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position right now? Would you fight back or walk away? Keep watching to see how this story takes an unexpected turn that nobody saw coming. The persistent knock at Jasmine's door roused her from a restless sleep. She'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, mentally calculating how long her meager savings would last, while simultaneously trying to formulate a plan for her uncertain future. Opening the door revealed a tall man in a chauffeur's uniform, cap tucked respectfully under his arm. "Miss Jasmine Winters?" he inquired with a formal tone that seemed out of place in her rundown apartment building. When she nodded, he extended a cream-colored envelope toward her. "I've been instructed to deliver this to you and await your response." The envelope was made of expensive stationery, her name written in elegant calligraphy across the front. Inside was a single card that read, "Your presence is requested at the Pinewood Heights Hotel Presidential Suite today at 2 p.m. A car will be waiting." It was signed simply with the initials WREE. No explanation, no context, just an invitation that seemed more like a summons. Jasmine's first thought was that this must be some cruel joke orchestrated by the Montgomerys. Perhaps they weren't satisfied with merely firing and evicting her, but wanted to humiliate her further. "Who sent this?" she demanded of the chauffeur, who maintained his professional demeanor. "I'm not at liberty to say, miss. I'm only instructed to bring you to the Pinewood Heights Hotel should you choose to accept the invitation." Jasmine closed the door, envelope in hand, and immediately called Maya. "It could be legitimate," Maya suggested after Jasmine explained the situation. "Maybe someone from the wedding saw what happened and wants to offer you a job. Rich people are always staying at Pinewood Heights. Or it could be a setup to humiliate me even more," Jasmine countered, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "What do I have to lose at this point?" Maya asked. The question hung in the air, uncomfortably accurate. Jasmine had already lost her job, would soon lose her home, and her professional reputation in Pinewood Falls had been shattered by Vanessa Montgomery's very public accusation. After changing into her most professional outfit, a simple black dress with a jacket she had sewn herself, Jasmine informed the waiting chauffeur she would accept the invitation. The luxury car attracted stares as it glided through Jasmine's neighborhood, where vehicles typically displayed rust spots and mismatched paint from second-hand repairs. The 20-minute drive to Pinewood Heights Hotel passed in silence, Jasmine's mind cycling through every possible scenario awaiting her. The Pinewood Heights Hotel occupied the highest point in town, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that stood in stark contrast to the quaint historical architecture of downtown Pinewood Falls. As the car pulled under the portico, a valet rushed to open Jasmine's door while giving the chauffeur a respectful nod. The lobby was a cathedral to luxury, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and staff dressed in impeccable uniforms. The moment Jasmine stepped inside, however, the welcoming atmosphere chilled. The receptionist's smile faltered, her gaze traveling from Jasmine's face to her simple clothing and back again. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting Jasmine had wandered in by mistake. "I have an appointment at the presidential suite," Jasmine stated, maintaining eye contact despite the discomfort crawling up her spine. The receptionist's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in obvious disbelief. "Your name?" "Jasmine Winters." After checking her computer, the receptionist's demeanor shifted from dismissive to confused. She picked up a phone, spoke quietly into the receiver, then summoned a security officer. "Thomas will escort you to the presidential suite," she said, the implication clear that this was to ensure Jasmine didn't wander into areas where she didn't belong. Thomas, a broad-shouldered man with a security badge, gestured toward a bank of elevators. "This way, please." Instead of the main elevators, however, he led her to a smaller service elevator at the back of the lobby. "Service elevator is faster," he explained unconvincingly. The presidential suite occupied the entire top floor of the hotel. When the elevator doors opened, Jasmine stepped directly into an entryway larger than her entire apartment. Thomas departed without another word, leaving her to approach the massive double doors at the end of the marble hallway alone. Before she could knock, the doors swung open, revealing an elegant, older black man in a perfectly tailored suit. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with silver at his temples and keen dark eyes that assessed Jasmine with unexpected warmth. "Miss Winters," he said, his deep voice carrying both authority and genuine pleasure. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please, come in." He extended his hand. Walter Richards, CEO of Richards Enterprises. The name meant nothing to Jasmine, though something about the surname tickled at her memory. She shook his hand, noticing his firm grip and the subtle Cartier watch peeking from beneath his cuff. "Please, have a seat," he said, guiding her to a sitting area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entirety of Pinewood Falls. A tea service had been arranged on the coffee table, delicate china cups waiting to be filled. "You must be wondering why I've asked you here," Walter began, pouring tea with practiced precision. "The truth is, I've been searching for you, or rather, for the kind person who helped my mother during the snowstorm 2 nights ago." Jasmine nearly dropped her teacup. "Your mother? Martha is your mother?" Walter nodded, his expression softening. "Martha Richards. She suffers from early-stage dementia and wandered away from her care facility during an outing. We've been searching for her for 3 days." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Miss Winters, according to my mother, you spent your last dollars to feed her, gave her your scarf, and offered her shelter in your own home when she was a complete stranger to you. Is this correct?" Jasmine nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. "My mother said you were a seamstress, an artist with fabric and thread, she called you." Walter's eyes crinkled at the corners. "She has always had an eye for talent, even now with her condition." He rose, walking to a side table where a leather portfolio lay waiting. "When I finally found my mother yesterday morning, she couldn't stop talking about the kind young woman who had helped her. She described your apartment in detail, including your sketches." He returned with the portfolio, opening it to reveal color printouts of designs that made Jasmine gasp. They were remarkably similar to her own sketchbook, the same aesthetic, the same attention to structural detail, but realized, with resources, she could only dream of accessing. "These are from our current collection at Richards Fashion House," Walter explained. "One of the top luxury brands in the country, though I suspect you haven't heard of us here in Pinewood Falls." He closed the portfolio, studying Jasmine's face. "Miss Winters, I owe you a debt of gratitude for your kindness to my mother. But beyond that, I believe I may have found the fresh talent our design team has been lacking." He straightened, suddenly every inch the CEO. "I would like to offer you a position as a personal seamstress for Richards Enterprises' fashion division in Chicago. The position includes relocation assistance, a company apartment, and a starting salary that I believe you'll find generous." Jasmine sat frozen, certain she had misheard. "Mr. Richards, I appreciate the offer, but if this is charity because of your mother," Walter interrupted with a wave of his hand. "I don't do charity, Miss Winters. I make investments. Your kindness to my mother brought you to my attention, but it's your talent I'm interested in. Unless I'm mistaken about the quality of work I glimpsed in your apartment?" Jasmine hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "How do I know this is real? That this isn't some elaborate joke?" Walter's expression remained serious. "A valid question. Perhaps this will help." He removed a business card from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. The embossed card read Walter Richards, CEO with the Richards Enterprises logo, a stylized R that Jasmine suddenly realized she recognized from luxury goods advertisements in fashion magazines. "Research me. Research my company. Take 24 hours to consider my offer. The car will be available to you tomorrow at the same time if you decide to accept." As Jasmine rode the elevator down, the main elevator this time, not the service one, she clutched Walter's business card like a talisman. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to flee Pinewood Falls and never look back. But another part, the part that had been hurt too many times before, warned her to proceed with caution. What if this was too good to be true? And why did Walter Richards, CEO of a company she'd never heard of, have a design portfolio that so closely resembled her own unique style? The Chicago skyline stretched before Jasmine like a glittering promise as the private car Walter had arranged transported her from O'Hare International Airport to her new home. 2 weeks had passed since she'd accepted his offer. 2 weeks of whirlwind preparations, background checks, and tearful goodbyes with Maya, who had promised to visit once Jasmine was settled. The Richards Enterprises building dominated the downtown landscape, a sleek tower of glass and steel rising 60 stories above Michigan Avenue. According to the company literature Jasmine had received, the building housed the corporate headquarters on the upper floors, design studios and prototype workshops in the middle, and exclusive retail space at street level. Most surprising was the revelation that the top 10 floors contained luxury apartments for key personnel, including the one that would now be hers. Rebecca Morris, Walter's executive assistant, greeted Jasmine in the soaring lobby. A petite woman with copper-colored hair and an efficient manner, she had handled all the logistics of Jasmine's relocation. "Welcome to Richards Enterprises," Rebecca said warmly. "Walter wanted to greet you personally, but he was called to an emergency board meeting. He asked me to get you settled and show you around." The apartment exceeded anything Jasmine could have imagined. A corner unit on the 48th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, custom furnishings, and a dedicated studio space, equipped with top-of-the-line sewing equipment and dress forms. "This can't be right," Jasmine murmured, as Rebecca led her through the spacious rooms. "This must be meant for someone else." Rebecca smiled. "Walter was very specific about your accommodations. He said your work requires both inspiration and precision, so you needed the right environment." After giving Jasmine time to unpack and rest, Rebecca returned to escort her to the design department on the 35th floor. "The team is expecting you," she explained as they rode the elevator down. "Victoria Harlow is the creative director. She's brilliant but demanding." Something in Rebecca's tone suggested this was an understatement. The design floor buzzed with activity. Sleek workstations, glass-walled meeting rooms, and large tables where fabric samples and sketches were spread out for review. Heads turned as Rebecca guided Jasmine toward the largest office at the far end of the open space. Victoria Harlow was everything Jasmine was not. Tall, blonde, razor-thin, dressed in black from head to toe, with an asymmetrical haircut that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. Her handshake was brief to the point of dismissive. "So you're Walter's special project," she said, her gaze sweeping over Jasmine with barely concealed disdain. "Rebecca, perhaps you could explain to Miss Winters how things work around here while I finish preparing for the collection review." Without waiting for a response, Victoria returned to her desk, effectively dismissing them both. Rebecca led Jasmine on a tour of the department, introducing her to the design team members, none of whom seemed particularly welcoming. "Don't take it personally," Rebecca whispered as they moved between workstations. "Victoria runs a tight ship, and they're all terrified of her. Plus, everyone's stressed about the upcoming fashion show. It's our biggest event of the year." By the end of her first week, the pattern was clear. Despite Walter's introduction of Jasmine as a new personal design consultant, Victoria assigned her the most menial tasks: organizing the fabric library, taking notes during meetings, running errands to the garment district. When Jasmine attempted to contribute ideas during team brainstorming sessions, Victoria would cut her off or simply talk over her as though she hadn't spoken. The design team followed Victoria's lead, excluding Jasmine from lunch gatherings and after-work drinks. Whispers followed her through the department. Only hired because of Walter, charity case, no formal training. Walter himself was rarely present, his schedule packed with international business travel. When he did appear, he always made a point of checking in with Jasmine, asking about her adjustment to Chicago and whether she had everything she needed for her work. These brief interactions only seemed to intensify Victoria's hostility. The one bright spot in Jasmine's new life was her evening visits with Martha Richards. Walter had moved his mother to a luxury care facility near the Richards building, and Jasmine often spent an hour or two with her after work. Though Martha's dementia meant she sometimes didn't recognize Jasmine, on her good days she was sharp-witted and full of stories. "You remind me of someone I knew long ago," Martha said during one such visit, her blue eyes momentarily clear and focused. A talented young woman with dreams too big for the small minds around her. Before Jasmine could ask more, Martha's attention drifted again, and she began speaking about Pinewood Falls in disconnected fragments. The river behind the old mill, the fire that wasn't an accident, promises broken. When Jasmine gently tried to guide her back, Martha gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Be careful," she warned, her voice suddenly urgent. "Not everyone welcomes the truth about what happened in Pinewood." 3 weeks into her new position, with the fashion show looming just a month away, Jasmine found herself working late in her studio apartment. Walter had asked her to create something special for the show, a signature piece that would represent fresh perspective. But Victoria had ensured Jasmine's workdays were too consumed with trivial tasks to make any progress. The midnight oil became her only option. The design that emerged under her skilled hands was unlike anything in the current Richards collection. An evening gown that transformed traditional African textile patterns into a contemporary silhouette, with structural elements that created a subtle optical illusion as the wearer moved. The bodice featured hand-beaded details reminiscent of the constellations visible from her grandmother's rural Georgia home. At 3 a.m., satisfied with the completed sketch and initial pattern drafts, Jasmine finally fell into exhausted sleep. The next morning, she arrived at the design floor to find the team gathered for an emergency meeting. Victoria stood at the head of the conference table, a smug smile playing at her lips. "I've had a breakthrough for our show finale," she announced, turning to reveal a mood board on the wall behind her. Jasmine froze in disbelief. There, pinned to Victoria's board, were concepts identical to her midnight creation. The same silhouette, the same pattern inspiration, even the constellation beadwork. "How did you?" Jasmine began, before catching herself. Victoria's smile widened fractionally. "You have something to contribute, Miss Winters?" Every eye in the room turned to Jasmine. In that moment, Rebecca appeared at the conference room door. "Jasmine, Walter would like to see you in his office immediately." As Jasmine stood to leave, Victoria called after her. "Don't forget to organize the button samples when you return. We need them categorized by size and color by end of day." Walter's office occupied the entire 60th floor, with views that made even the impressive panorama from Jasmine's apartment seem limited by comparison. Unlike Victoria's sterile modernism, Walter's space was a thoughtful blend of contemporary design and African art pieces, masks, sculptures, and textiles that spoke to a deep appreciation of heritage. "How are you settling in, Jasmine?" he asked, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "The team is treating you well?" The direct question caught her off guard. "Everyone has been. Instructive," she replied carefully. Walter's expression suggested he heard what she wasn't saying. "Victoria can be challenging," he acknowledged. "She's brilliant, but not always collaborative. That's why I brought you on board. We need fresh perspective, someone who sees fashion as both art and cultural expression." He leaned forward. "I saw your grandmother's influence in your sketches, the same respect for tradition combined with forward-thinking design that made Eliza Winters' work special, even if it was never properly recognized." Jasmine's breath caught. "You knew my grandmother?" Walter's expression shifted, becoming unreadable. "I knew of her work," he said after a moment. "Research is part of my investment process." Before Jasmine could press further, Rebecca entered with an urgent message, and the conversation turned to business matters. As Jasmine returned to the design floor, Victoria was waiting by the elevator. "Let me make something clear," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Walter may have hired you out of some misplaced guilt or diversity initiative, but this is my department. Cross me, and you'll be back sewing wedding dresses in whatever backwater town you came from before your trial period ends." The threat hung in the air between them, but it was Victoria's words about misplaced guilt that echoed in Jasmine's mind as she mechanically sorted buttons for the remainder of the afternoon. That evening, while organizing her workspace at home, Jasmine discovered a folder had been slipped under her door. Inside were printouts of internal emails between Victoria and various team members, with instructions to exclude Jasmine from key meetings and ensure her contributions were minimized or appropriated. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the front. "You're not the first. Victoria has been stealing designs from junior staff for years. A friend." Jasmine stared at the evidence, a cold certainty forming in her mind. She needed to understand what was really happening at Richards Enterprises. and why Walter Richards, with his empire of luxury brands, had really brought her to Chicago. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at the design floor an hour early, printouts of her original sketches in hand. Victoria was already in her office, alone, the perfect opportunity for a confrontation without witnesses. "We need to talk," Jasmine said, closing Victoria's office door behind her. Victoria barely glanced up from her tablet. "I'm busy preparing for the collection review. Whatever button emergency you're having can wait until—" "You stole my design," Jasmine interrupted, placing her sketches on Victoria's desk. "This was my original work, created in my apartment 2 nights ago. Somehow you accessed it and presented it as your own yesterday." Victoria finally looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to calculated amusement. "Serious accusations require serious evidence, Miss Winters. Those could be sketches you made this morning based on my presentation yesterday." She leaned back in her chair, perfectly at ease. "Besides, even if I had somehow seen your little doodles, taking inspiration is part of the creative process. That's how fashion works. Not like this," Jasmine insisted. "This isn't inspiration, it's theft. And I want to know how you got access to my private workspace." Victoria's smile disappeared. "Let me explain something," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Walter Richards may have brought you here as his pet project, but I've built this department over 15 years. The board respects me. The industry respects me. You? You're nothing but a charity case. Some random seamstress he met while searching for his wandering mother." She stood, smoothing her impeccable black dress. "Push this, and you'll be gone before your probationary period ends. No references, no portfolio, just another failed designer with a discrimination complaint no one will take seriously." The threat was explicit, but something else in Victoria's words caught Jasmine's attention. "How did you know I met Walter while he was searching for his mother? That's not public information." A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed Victoria's face before her mask of superiority returned. Chicago's fashion world is small, and gossip travels. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." Jasmine left Victoria's office with more questions than answers. Rather than returning to her assigned tasks, she made her way to a quiet corner of the building's atrium and opened her laptop. If Victoria knew details about how Walter had found his mother, what else might she know? What connections existed that Jasmine wasn't seeing? Her online search for Victoria Harlow yielded the expected professional profiles. Graduate of Parsons School of Design, former assistant at Vogue, rising star at several luxury brands before landing at Richards Enterprises 15 years ago. Nothing unusual until Jasmine scrolled to an industry article from 7 years prior, featuring a charity gala in New York. In the background of a group photo, Victoria stood with a familiar-looking blonde woman, Vanessa Montgomery. The caption identified them as cousins. Jasmine's heart raced as she dug deeper. Victoria Harlow, born Victoria Montgomery, in Pinewood Falls, Vermont. Daughter of George Montgomery, brother to William Montgomery, Vanessa's father and owner of Montgomery Development. The family connection explained Victoria's hostility, but raised larger questions about Walter's motivations. Why would he hire someone from Pinewood Falls, where the Montgomerys held such power, without mentioning the connection? Unless he hadn't known? Or unless he had known, and it was somehow part of his plan? Jasmine's investigation was interrupted by an all-staff email announcing a major new partnership between Richards Enterprises and Montgomery Development Corporation. The message included an invitation to a formal dinner that evening to celebrate the collaboration. Listed among the special guests were William and Vanessa Montgomery. Jasmine stared at the screen in disbelief. Had Walter betrayed her, or was he unaware of the Montgomerys' treatment of her in Pinewood Falls? More importantly, what would happen when Vanessa inevitably recognized her at the dinner? The formal dinner was held in the Richards Building's exclusive penthouse restaurant. Jasmine arrived late deliberately, hoping to blend into the background while observing the interaction between Walter and the Montgomerys. She had chosen to wear one of her own designs, a deep blue cocktail dress with subtle structural elements that made it appear to shimmer as she moved. Rebecca intercepted her near the entrance. "Walter's been looking for you," she whispered. He wants you at the main table. The main table, where Walter sat with William Montgomery on one side and Victoria on the other. Vanessa was positioned directly across from Jasmine's assigned seat, engaged in animated conversation with a man Jasmine didn't recognize. As she approached, Walter rose to greet her. "Jasmine, I'm glad you could join us. Allow me to introduce our guests." William Montgomery extended his hand without really looking at her, his attention already returning to Walter. Vanessa, however, froze mid-sentence, her champagne glass halting halfway to her lips. Recognition flickered in her eyes, quickly masked by a practiced social smile. "Jasmine Winters, is it?" she said, voice dripping with false warmth. "Victoria has mentioned you're new to the team. How are you finding Chicago compared to Where was it you were from again?" The deliberate pretense that she didn't recognize Jasmine was perhaps more insulting than open hostility would have been. "Pinewood Falls," Jasmine replied evenly. "Where your wedding was held last month. I believe we've met." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Victoria's expression sharpened with warning, while William Montgomery finally gave Jasmine his full attention. Walter, surprisingly, appeared more intrigued than concerned by the exchange. Indeed, Vanessa recovered smoothly. Chicago must be quite the adjustment from such a quaint little town. The dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness, but Jasmine couldn't miss the significant glances exchanged between Victoria and her cousins. During the dessert course, she excused herself to use the restroom, intentionally taking a path that would lead her past William and Walter, who had moved to a quiet corner for private conversation. Handling the Pinewood situation discreetly, William was saying as she passed, "The Historical Preservation Society's claims won't hold up in court, but the negative publicity could affect share prices temporarily." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "History has a way of resurfacing when least expected. I've learned it's better to address it directly than hope it remains buried." His eyes met Jasmine's as she walked by, his expression unreadable. That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. The connections between Walter, the Montgomerys, and Pinewood Falls seemed too deliberate to be coincidence. On impulse, she texted Rebecca, asking if she might have time for coffee before work. Rebecca agreed, suggesting they meet at a small cafe near the Richards building at 7 a.m. "I need your help," Jasmine said once they were seated with their coffees. "I think there's something going on between Richards Enterprises and the Montgomerys that's connected to Pinewood Falls, and somehow I'm caught in the middle of it." Rebecca studied her for a long moment before responding. "What do you know about Walter's background?" "Almost nothing," Jasmine admitted. "Just that he built Richards Enterprises into a luxury empire." "Walter doesn't discuss his early years publicly," Rebecca said cautiously. "But yes, there's a connection to Pinewood Falls. His father owned property there in the 1950s. The company archives might have more information." "Can you help me access them?" Jasmine asked. Rebecca hesitated. "They're restricted, but I owe Walter my career. He gave me a chance when no one else would. If something's happening that might hurt him, or the company, I need to know." Later that day, Rebecca texted Jasmine with instructions to meet her in the sub-basement archives after hours. The vast room contained the physical records of Richards Enterprises from its founding, correspondence, property deeds, financial statements, all meticulously preserved and cataloged. "We need to look for anything related to Pinewood Falls," Rebecca explained, leading Jasmine to a section of filing cabinets dating from the 1940s through the 60s. Hours of searching yielded a startling discovery, a deed showing that Richards Agricultural Supply had purchased 3 blocks of commercial property in downtown Pinewood Falls in 1949. The seller was listed as Winters Family Holdings. Jasmine's hands trembled as she read her own family name. Further documents revealed that the property had previously been a thriving black business district centered around Winters Tailoring and Dry Goods, a shop founded by Jasmine's great-grandparents in 1920. "My grandmother never mentioned owning property in Pinewood Falls," Jasmine murmured, confused. "She only talked about working for white families as a seamstress." A folder marked Pinewood Acquisition. Legal contained correspondence that explained why. The sale had been forced through a combination of discriminatory banking practices, manipulated property assessments, and threats from local officials, all orchestrated by Montgomery Investments, with Richards Agricultural purchasing the properties afterward. "This can't be right," Jasmine said, struggling to process the information. "Why would Walter hire me if his family was involved in taking my family's property?" "Walter's not his father," Rebecca replied. "And there's something else you should see." She handed Jasmine a faded newspaper clipping from 1967. The small headline read, "Local businessman found dead after property dispute." The article described how Richard Richards Sr. had been found dead in his car after reportedly attempting to return properties to original owners following new information about acquisition circumstances. The Montgomery name appeared nowhere in the article, but a handwritten note in the margin read, "They killed him for trying to make it right." Their research was interrupted by Martha's sudden hospitalization. Jasmine rushed to the care facility upon receiving the call, finding Walter already at his mother's bedside. Martha's condition had deteriorated dramatically. The doctors suspected a minor stroke. As Jasmine sat with them, Martha drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally gripping Jasmine's hand and mistaking her for someone named Eliza. "You came back," she murmured during one lucid moment. "I tried to find you after. To return what was yours." Before Jasmine could respond, Walter guided her outside the room. "She often confuses past and present," he explained gently. "The doctors think she'll recover, but these episodes are becoming more frequent." Jasmine studied his face, searching for any indication that he knew about her discoveries in the archives. "Walter, who is Eliza to your mother?" she asked directly. Something shifted in his expression. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. "A friend from long ago," he answered carefully. "Someone she cared for deeply." As Jasmine prepared to leave, a nurse handed her a small box that had fallen from Martha's handbag. "She keeps this with her always," the nurse explained. "Make sure it gets back to her when she wakes." Alone in the hospital corridor, Jasmine couldn't resist peeking inside the box. There, nestled in faded tissue paper, was a photograph of two young women, one clearly recognizable as a youthful Martha, the other a striking black woman whose features mirrored Jasmine's own. Written on the back in faded ink, "Martha and Eliza, Pinewood Falls, 1950. 1." Jasmine stared at her grandmother's face. The pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed beginning to fall into place. When she looked up, Walter stood watching her from the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Did you ever discover that someone you trusted was hiding important information from you?" Comment number 1. If you've ever felt betrayed by secrets kept from you. Life is full of unexpected connections, isn't it? The past often reaches into our present in ways we never anticipated. Like this video, if you believe that family histories shape our lives in powerful ways we may not even realize. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about uncovering hidden truths. What do you think is really going on between Walter and the Montgomerys? Is he Jasmine's ally, or is he using her for his own purposes? Keep watching to see how the web of secrets surrounding Pinewood Falls begins to unravel. The morning after Martha's hospitalization, Walter's assistant called to inform Jasmine that he wanted to meet her in his office immediately. The formal summons left no room for delay or excuse. When she arrived, Walter was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, silhouetted against the Chicago skyline. "You accessed the company archives last night," he said without turning. "It wasn't a question. How did you know?" Jasmine asked, deciding honesty was her only viable approach. "Security protocols," Walter replied, finally facing her. His expression was carefully controlled, not angry exactly, but intensely focused. "The archives contain sensitive information. Access is logged and reported directly to me." He gestured to the sitting area. "Please, have a seat. I believe we're overdue for a conversation." Jasmine perched on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "Am I fired?" she asked bluntly. To her surprise, Walter chuckled, though the sound held little humor. "No, Jasmine, you're not fired. In fact, your initiative confirms what I suspected when I first offered you the position." He took a seat across from her. "You found the records about Pinewood Falls. About the property that once belonged to your family. Jasmine nodded. What I don't understand is why you didn't tell me. Why bring me to Chicago, give me this opportunity, without mentioning our family's connection? Walter sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. Because I wanted to evaluate you on your own merits first. Because the full story is complicated and painful. And because, frankly, I wasn't certain how much you knew about your family's history in Pinewood Falls. He leaned forward. What did your grandmother tell you about her life there? Not much, Jasmine admitted. She said she worked as a seamstress for wealthy families, that her parents had a small tailoring business that failed during the Depression. She never mentioned owning significant property. Walter nodded as though this confirmed his suspicions. The history that appears in official records is rarely the complete truth, especially for Black Americans. My father, Richard Richards Sr., purchased those properties in 1949, but what the deed doesn't show is that he was acting as the front man for Montgomery Investments. He let that sink in before continuing. My father was a successful businessman in his own right, but William Montgomery Sr., the current William's grandfather, had the political connections to make certain deals happen. One of those deals was acquiring the thriving Black business district in Pinewood Falls for redevelopment. Jasmine processed this information, connecting it to the documents she'd seen. The sale wasn't legitimate, was it? Walter's expression darkened. No. The Winters family and other Black property owners were systematically forced out through a combination of tactics: banks suddenly calling in loans, insurance companies canceling policies, tax assessors inflating property values, and when those methods didn't work, more direct threats. My father didn't know the full extent of it initially. He believed he was simply purchasing distressed properties. He rose, walking to a cabinet that Jasmine had assumed contained liquor. Instead, when he opened it, she saw rows of carefully labeled document boxes. He selected one and returned to his seat. In 1965, my father discovered evidence of the Montgomery's methods. He was a complicated man, but he had his own moral code. He began investigating ways to return the properties to their rightful owners or provide appropriate compensation. From the box, Walter removed a folder of yellowed papers. These are copies of his correspondence with attorneys, including drafts of documents that would have transferred ownership back to the original families, including yours. Jasmine accepted the folder with trembling hands. But the newspaper article, it said he died before he could complete whatever he was planning. He was murdered, Walter stated flatly. The official report called it an accident, brake lines that failed at an unfortunate moment. But my father had received threats. He knew he was in danger, but he persisted. He paused, his gaze distant. I was 14 when he died. My mother knew the truth, but she was afraid, for herself, for me. We moved away from Vermont, rebuilt our lives elsewhere. The Montgomerys acquired my father's holdings in Pinewood Falls and expanded their control over the town. Jasmine struggled to absorb the magnitude of what Walter was revealing. So, when Martha wandered off and I helped her, it was coincidence. Or fate, if you believe in such things, Walter said. When she described you in your apartment, when she mentioned seeing your designs, I knew immediately who you must be. Eliza Winters' granddaughter, still living in the shadow of a historical injustice neither of us created but both of us inherited. But the partnership with Montgomery Development, Jasmine pressed. The dinner last night. If you know what they did, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, Walter interrupted. I've spent decades building Richards Enterprises, creating the resources and influence necessary to finally address what happened in Pinewood Falls. The current Montgomerys believe I'm interested in their development project as a passive investor. What they don't know is that I've been systematically documenting their continued use of discriminatory practices, building a case that will not only stop their current development, but potentially require restitution to families like yours. He leaned forward intently. The planned development would demolish the last physical evidence of the original Black business district. I can't allow that to happen. Jasmine's mind raced. Does Victoria know about any of this? Walter's expression hardened. Victoria is loyal to her family above all else. She was placed in my company years ago, as the Montgomery's eyes and ears. I've always known this, but allowed it because it gave me insight into their operations. She's been sabotaging my work, Jasmine revealed, stealing my designs, isolating me from the team. I suspected as much, Walter acknowledged. But confronting her directly would have alerted the Montgomerys that something was amiss. I needed to wait until our legal preparation was complete. He checked his watch, which, as of this morning, it is. My attorneys have filed injunctions against the Pinewood Falls development based on historical preservation grounds and evidence of ongoing discriminatory practices. Their conversation was interrupted by Walter's private line ringing. The terse exchange that followed confirmed his expectations. Victoria had somehow learned of the legal filings and had already contacted her cousins. "It appears our timeline has accelerated," he told Jasmine after hanging up. "Victoria has called in sick today. By now, she's likely meeting with the Montgomerys to plan their response." Jasmine felt overwhelmed. "What do you need me to do?" Walter considered her question carefully. "Visit my mother. She's been asking for you, and she may have information we still need. Her lucid moments are becoming rarer, but when they come, her memory of the distant past is remarkably clear." At the hospital, Jasmine found Martha awake but confused, initially mistaking her for a nurse. As Jasmine sat quietly beside her, reading from a book she had brought, Martha gradually became more present. "You're not Eliza," she said suddenly, her gaze sharpening. "But you look so much like her." "Her granddaughter?" Jasmine nodded, setting aside the book. "Yes, I'm Eliza's granddaughter." "Jasmine." Martha studied her face intently. "She was my dearest friend, though no one could know. Not in Pinewood Falls in those days." Her thin fingers plucked restlessly at the blanket. "I tried to warn her about what my father and the Montgomerys were planning. I thought there would be time to stop it." "What happened?" Jasmine prompted gently. "They threatened her family," Martha whispered, tears welling in her faded blue eyes. "Her brother had been seen talking to a white waitress. In 1950, that was enough. They said they would have him arrested, or worse, if the Winters family didn't sell their properties." She gripped Jasmine's hand with surprising strength. "I was a coward. I should have spoken up publicly, gone to the authorities. Instead, I just watched as my father and William Montgomery Sr. took everything the black families in Pinewood had built over generations." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I left town afterward. Couldn't bear to see what they'd done. Married Richard because he was kind and because he wasn't part of that world. Never knew what happened to Eliza until years later." "What happened later?" Jasmine asked, sensing they were approaching something crucial. "Richard discovered the truth," Martha said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Found documents in my father's papers after he died. He was determined to make it right, return the properties. The Montgomerys killed him for it." She closed her eyes, momentarily exhausted by the emotional recounting. "I tried to find Eliza afterward, to tell her what Richard had tried to do. But she was gone from Pinewood by then. No one would tell me where." Jasmine sat with this information, pieces of her family history she'd never known falling into place. Her grandmother had rarely spoken of Pinewood Falls, and never with fondness. Now she understood why. "Martha," she said gently, "Walter is trying to finish what his father started. To make things right." Martha's eyes flew open, suddenly clear and focused. "Be careful. The Montgomerys don't surrender power willingly. They'll fight, and they fight dirty. Always have." Before Jasmine could ask more, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her expression a mask of professional concern. "Jasmine, I didn't expect to find you here," she said, her tone falsely sweet. "How touching that you formed such a bond with Walter's mother." Behind Victoria, two men in suits waited in the hallway. One Jasmine recognized as William Montgomery from the dinner. "I stopped by to check on Mrs. Richards," Victoria continued, entering the room fully. "Walter mentioned she'd had a setback." Martha's grip on Jasmine's hand tightened painfully. "You're Georgie's girl," she said to Victoria, her voice suddenly sharp. "You look just like him. Same cold eyes." Victoria's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered. "Mrs.?" Richards is obviously confused. Perhaps it would be best if you left, Jasmine. Family should be with her now. I'm staying, Jasmine replied firmly, recognizing the thinly veiled attempt to separate her from Martha. Mrs. Richards asked for my company specifically. Victoria's expression hardened. Always the stubborn one, aren't you? Just like your grandmother, from what I hear. The direct acknowledgement that Victoria knew exactly who Jasmine was hung in the air between them. Walter and I have just come from a rather illuminating meeting, Jasmine countered, hoping her bluff would buy time. He's been quite forthcoming about the history between our families. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. She glanced toward the doorway where William Montgomery remained just out of sight. Well, I won't intrude further, she said finally. But this conversation isn't over, Jasmine. Some matters are better left in the past, for everyone's benefit. After Victoria departed, Martha sank back against her pillows, visibly exhausted. They'll go after Walter now, she murmured. They always destroy anyone who threatens their power. As if summoned by her words, Walter appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. Victoria's resigned. He informed Jasmine without preamble. And William Montgomery has called an emergency meeting of our investors for tomorrow morning. They're moving faster than I anticipated. Martha reached for her son's hand. I told her everything, she said. About Eliza. About your father. She deserves to know. Walter nodded, his gaze meeting Jasmine's over his mother's bed. Then you understand what we're up against, and why I need your help to finish what my father started nearly 60 years ago. The Richards Enterprises boardroom occupied the entire west wing of the 59th floor, its wall of windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. At 9 a.m. sharp, Jasmine sat beside Walter as board members and major investors filed in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. William Montgomery arrived last, flanked by his daughter Vanessa and a team of attorneys. Victoria stood slightly apart, her posture rigid with barely contained triumph. Before we begin, William announced without waiting for formal introductions, I've distributed documentation outlining serious concerns about the direction of Richards Enterprises under current leadership. He gestured to the folders being passed around the table. These materials demonstrate a pattern of decisions detrimental to shareholder interests, culminating in yesterday's frivolous legal actions against Montgomery Development, actions apparently motivated by personal vendettas rather than sound business judgment. Walter remained impassive, allowing Montgomery to continue his opening salvo uninterrupted. Additionally, Montgomery pressed on. We've uncovered evidence that Mr. Richards has been using company resources to pursue personal projects, including the hiring of unqualified personnel based on personal relationships rather than merit. His gaze flicked dismissively toward Jasmine. The board should be aware that Miss Winters here was hired without proper vetting, despite having no formal design education or relevant experience beyond alterations at a small-town bridal shop. Several board members turned to study Jasmine with new interest. Rather than shrinking under their scrutiny, she straightened in her chair, channeling her grandmother's dignity in the face of prejudice. Mr. Montgomery, Walter finally spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. I appreciate your concern for the company I built from the ground up over 30 years. However, your characterization of recent events contains significant factual errors and omissions. He opened his own folder, extracting a single document which he slid across the table to Montgomery. This might refresh your memory about certain historical connections between our families. Montgomery glanced at the paper, his face flushing with either anger or surprise. Jasmine couldn't tell which. Ancient history, he dismissed, pushing the document aside. Irrelevant to current business considerations. On the contrary, Walter countered, it's directly relevant to the development project in Pinewood Falls and to Richards Enterprises' ethical obligations as a corporate citizen. He turned to address the board directly. What Mr. Matisse. Montgomery hasn't told you is that the property his company plans to develop was acquired through documented discriminatory practices in the 1950s. Practices orchestrated by his grandfather in collaboration with local officials, bankers, and insurance companies to systematically dispossess black property owners. Murmurs spread around the table as board members exchanged concerned glances. Montgomery's attorney leaned forward. "These are serious and potentially defamatory allegations, Mr. Richards. Do you have evidence to substantiate such claims?" In response, Walter signaled to his assistant, who distributed comprehensive dossiers to each person present. "The evidence is extensive and irrefutable," Walter stated calmly, "including contemporary documentation of the original transactions, my father's subsequent investigation in the 1960s, and, most damaging, evidence that current Montgomery development practices continue to reflect discriminatory patterns in property acquisition and development." The next hour unfolded in tense discussion as board members reviewed the materials. Montgomery's initial dismissive attitude gradually gave way to calculated damage control. Even if historical improprieties occurred, which we do not concede, modern corporate governance cannot be held hostage to events from 70 years ago, he argued. "The statute of limitations." "This isn't about legal liability," Walter interrupted. "It's about moral responsibility and the reputation of Richards Enterprises. The injunctions we've filed seek only to pause development until a proper historical assessment can be completed and an equitable resolution found for the families affected." Victoria, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward. "This is personal vendetta masquerading as corporate ethics," she declared. "Walter hired Jasmine Winters specifically to manufacture this controversy. She has no qualifications beyond a personal connection to this supposed historical grievance." She turned to Jasmine, her expression contemptuous. "Tell them how you met Walter, Miss Winters. Tell them how you manipulated an elderly woman with dementia to gain access to her wealthy son." The accusation hung in the air, so outrageous that Jasmine momentarily struggled to respond. Before she could formulate an answer, the boardroom door opened to admit Rebecca, accompanied by a distinguished older black man Jasmine didn't recognize. "I believe I can address that question," the newcomer stated, stepping forward with quiet authority. "I'm Dr. James Wilson, Martha Richards' primary physician for the past 15 years. He nodded respectfully to Walter before continuing. "Mrs. Richards' occasional wandering is well documented in her medical records. Her encounter with Miss Winters during a snowstorm was completely unplanned, and Miss Winters' assistance potentially saved Martha's life that night." He turned to Victoria. "Your characterization of the situation is not only false, but suggests a disturbing willingness to manipulate medical circumstances for personal advantage." The tide of the meeting perceptibly shifted. Several board members who had appeared sympathetic to Montgomery now regarded him and Victoria with visible skepticism. As the morning progressed, the confrontation evolved from Montgomery's attempted coup to a negotiation about Richards Enterprises' approach to the Pinewood Falls development. By noon, a tentative agreement had been reached. Development would be paused pending independent historical assessment, with provisions for memorial and restitution programs should the assessment confirm Walter's claims. As the meeting adjourned, Montgomery pulled Walter aside for what appeared to be a tense private conversation. Victoria approached Jasmine with cold fury in her eyes. "This isn't over," she promised in a low voice. "The Montgomerys don't forget, and we don't forgive. Whatever you think you've won today, remember that we still control Pinewood Falls." Jasmine met her gaze steadily, and that's exactly the problem. You've controlled it through intimidation and discrimination for generations. That ends now. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. Such confidence from someone whose position hangs by a thread. Walter may have won this skirmish, but the fashion show is in 2 weeks. Your future in this industry depends on his continued goodwill, something that might prove fleeting once this property dispute is resolved. She leaned closer. "Do you really think he cares about you or your little designs? You're just a means to an end, a convenient symbol of historical wrongs he can use to assuage his family guilt." Though the words stung, Jasmine refused to show it. "My work speaks for itself. Unlike you, I don't need to steal others' designs to succeed." Victoria's composure cracked momentarily before she recovered. "We'll see about that." That afternoon, the local Pinewood Falls newspaper published a feature story online with the headline, Chicago fashion controversy linked to Pinewood native. The article, clearly sourced from Victoria or the Montgomerys, painted Jasmine as an opportunistic failed seamstress who had manipulated an elderly woman to gain access to a wealthy family. It implied that she was using historical grievances to extort compensation from Richards Enterprises while undermining a development project that would bring jobs and economic growth to Pinewood Falls. The story spread quickly through industry publications, picked up by fashion blogs that questioned Jasmine's qualifications and motives. By evening, Walter was receiving calls from board members concerned about the public relations impact. "They're pressuring me to distance the company from you," he admitted during a late meeting in his office. To frame this as a historical investigation separate from current personnel matters. Jasmine felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. "You're firing me." Walter shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. But we need to accelerate our timeline. The fashion show becomes even more important now. It's your opportunity to demonstrate your talent so convincingly that no one can question why you're here." He hesitated before adding, "However, I think it might be wise for you to work primarily from your apartment until then. Minimize opportunities for Victoria or her allies to interfere." What Walter didn't say, but Jasmine clearly understood, was that her presence had become a liability to him in navigating the corporate politics unleashed by their confrontation with the Montgomerys. Back in her apartment, Jasmine discovered that her security access had been downgraded. She could enter her residence but no longer had clearance for the design floor or Walter's executive suite. The isolation strategy might have been protective, as Walter suggested, but it felt uncomfortably like being sidelined. Her suspicions deepened the following day when she received a folder of documents from Rebecca, delivered by courier rather than in person. Inside were copies of correspondence between Walter and William Montgomery dating back 6 months, long before Jasmine's arrival in Chicago, discussing potential partnership opportunities in several development projects, including Pinewood Falls. The most recent email had been sent just 3 days ago, with Walter suggesting modifications to the development plan that would preserve historical elements while allowing for profitable modernization. Nothing in the correspondence mentioned restitution or acknowledged historical wrongs. Had Walter been playing both sides all along? Was his apparent championing of justice for the displaced families simply a negotiating tactic to secure better terms for his own investment? Feeling betrayed and uncertain, Jasmine packed an overnight bag. If Walter had been manipulating her all along, she needed distance to consider her next steps. As she reached for her apartment door, her phone rang, the care facility where Martha was recovering. "Mrs. Richards is asking for you urgently," the night nurse explained. "She's quite agitated and says she needs to tell you something important before it's too late." Despite her reservations about the Richards family at that moment, Jasmine couldn't ignore Martha's request. When she arrived at the facility, she found Martha more alert than she'd been since her hospitalization, though physical weakness kept her confined to bed. "They killed him," Martha stated without preamble as soon as they were alone. "Richard, Walter's father. The Montgomerys murdered him for trying to return the properties." Jasmine approached the bed cautiously. "I know, Martha," Walter told me. Martha shook her head impatiently. "Not everything. Walter doesn't know everything. I kept some things from him, to protect him when he was young, and later, habit, I suppose. The burden of secrets carried too long." From beneath her pillow, she withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. Richard knew they might come for him. He left evidence, documentation of everything, including threats he'd received. "I hid it after he died." Her hand trembled as she extended the envelope. "This proves it wasn't an accident. Walter's been gathering his own evidence for years, but he never had this, the piece that connects the Montgomerys directly to his father's death." Jasmine accepted the envelope, understanding its potential significance, but still conflicted about Walter's true intentions. "Martha, I found documents showing Walter has been negotiating with the Montgomerys about the Pinewood development for months, that he might be planning to partner with them even after everything he knows they've done." Martha's expression reflected surprise, then understanding. "The long game," she murmured. "Just like his father. Richard appeared to cooperate with the Montgomerys for years, while secretly documenting their crimes. She reached for Jasmine's hand. "Walter has been building this case for decades, Jasmine. Gathering evidence, acquiring resources and influence, positioning himself to finally confront the people who destroyed your family's legacy and killed his father. If he's been negotiating with them, it's to gain access and information, not to join them." Before Jasmine could process this perspective, commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Walter's voice, uncharacteristically raised, was met with the deeper tones of hospital security. When the door opened, Walter entered, tension evident in every line of his body. "Victoria informed the facility administration that you're exploiting a vulnerable patient," he explained tersely. "They were prepared to have you removed until I intervened." Behind him, Jasmine glimpsed Vanessa Montgomery, speaking with a facility administrator, gesturing emphatically in their direction. "The fashion show begins in 30 minutes, Walter continued. "Victoria is presenting the collection, including designs suspiciously similar to your work. We need to move now if we're going to stop her." Martha pressed the envelope more firmly into Jasmine's hands. "Go," she urged. "Finish what began 70 years ago." The Richards Enterprises annual fashion show was the company's most prestigious event, attended by industry leaders, major buyers, and fashion media from around the world. By the time Jasmine and Walter arrived at the venue, an architecturally stunning converted warehouse in Chicago's West Loop, Victoria's presentation was already underway. They slipped in through a service entrance, where Rebecca waited with a security badge that would give them access to the backstage area. "She's presenting your constellation design as the finale," Rebecca whispered as they navigated the dimly lit corridors behind the runway. "The one with the African textile influences and beadwork." From their position in the wings, they could see Victoria on stage, describing her visionary new collection to the assembled audience. On monitors displaying the runway, models showcased designs that Jasmine recognized immediately, not just the constellation gown, but several other concepts from her personal sketchbook. "How did she get access to all of these?" Jasmine whispered to Walter. "She must have had your apartment bugged or monitored somehow," he replied grimly. "The important question now is what we're going to do about it." Jasmine clutched the envelope from Martha, suddenly understanding its value beyond the historical revelation it contained. "I need 5 minutes on that stage," she told Walter. "Can you make that happen?" For the first time since she'd met him, Walter smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features. "Miss Winters, I am still the CEO of this company. I can do considerably more than that." As Victoria prepared to introduce the finale piece, Walter strode onto the stage, interrupting her mid-sentence. The audience murmured in surprise as he took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there's been a significant oversight in today's presentation." Victoria's face contorted with barely controlled rage as Walter continued. "The collection you've been viewing represents the extraordinary talent of a designer who should be properly recognized." He extended his hand toward the wings. "Please welcome the true creative force behind these designs, Jasmine Winters." The audience's confused applause provided cover for Victoria's hissed objection as Jasmine joined them on stage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded of Walter. "This is my collection." "Is it?" Jasmine countered, addressing the audience directly. "I have documentation proving these designs originated in my sketchbook." She held up her phone, displaying dated photos of her original drawings alongside timestamps and metadata. "I also have evidence of systematic design theft within Richards Enterprises, a practice that ends today." Security personnel approached from both sides of the stage as Victoria signaled frantically for intervention. Walter raised a hand to stop them. "As CEO, I'm authorizing this presentation," he stated firmly. "The audience deserves the truth." What followed was unprecedented in fashion show history, a real-time documentation of design theft displayed on the venue's massive screens, with Jasmine's original sketches shown alongside Victoria's appropriated versions. The audience's initial confusion gave way to understanding as the evidence mounted. Journalists in the front row were already typing furiously on their phones, breaking the story on social media. Victoria lunged for the microphone, but in her haste, collided with a nearby camera operator. The resulting footage, of Victoria physically attempting to silence Jasmine while screaming racist obscenities, was captured live and immediately went viral online. As security finally escorted a still-shouting Victoria from the stage, Walter reclaimed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Richards Enterprises was founded on principles of integrity and innovation. Today, we recommit to those values by announcing two initiatives. First, the establishment of the Winters Design Fellowship for young designers from underrepresented backgrounds, and second, a comprehensive historical preservation and restitution program in Pinewood Falls, Vermont, to address historical injustices connected to property development in that community." The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet in recognition of the unprecedented moment they had witnessed. As Jasmine stood beside Walter, watching Victoria being led away and sensing the momentum of justice finally gaining force after decades of suppression, she felt her grandmother's presence as strongly as if Eliza Winters stood beside her on that stage, witnessing the long-delayed vindication of her family's legacy. The soft April rain fell gently on the newly installed cobblestone street that marked the entrance to Winters Square in downtown Pinewood Falls. 1 year had passed since the confrontation at the Richards Enterprises fashion show, a year of transformative change for both Jasmine and the small Vermont town that had once rejected her. Jasmine stepped out of the black town car, accepting the umbrella offered by the driver as she surveyed the revitalized district. Where once stood deteriorating buildings slated for demolition, now thrived a carefully restored historical black business district, with Winters' legacy design house occupying the prominent corner location that had belonged to her great-grandparents 70 years earlier. The grand opening celebration had drawn visitors from across the country, including fashion industry leaders, historical preservation experts, and families of the original black business owners who had been displaced in the 1950s. Inside the design house, Eleanor Thompson, once Jasmine's exploitative employer at Elegance Bridal, now managed daily operations, her former arrogance replaced by genuine respect, earned through months of proving herself worthy of a second chance. "The mayor just arrived," Eleanor informed Jasmine, checking items off her clipboard with practiced efficiency. "And the Historical Society president wants to coordinate timing for the plaque dedication ceremony." Jasmine nodded, adjusting a display of her latest collection. Elegant designs that incorporated subtle references to African-American quilting traditions while maintaining a contemporary silhouette. The back wall of the boutique featured a timeline of Winters' family history in Pinewood Falls, from the original tailor shop established after emancipation to the thriving business district of the 1940s to the present-day restoration. The exhibition had become an unexpected tourist attraction, drawing school groups and history enthusiasts to learn about a chapter of Vermont history long obscured in official accounts. "Victoria's community service hours have been completed," Walter commented, appearing at Jasmine's side as she reviewed final preparations for the ceremony. The judge rejected her request for early termination. Following her public meltdown and the subsequent investigation into intellectual property theft, Victoria had narrowly avoided criminal charges by accepting a plea deal that included 500 hours of community service at a diversity education center in Chicago. The Montgomery Development Company hadn't fared much better. Federal investigators, acting on evidence provided by Walter and supplemented by Martha's preserved documents, had uncovered a pattern of discriminatory practices spanning decades. The resulting fines and settlements had forced the company to sell numerous properties, including most of their Pinewood Falls holdings. "Martha's looking for you," Walter added with a gentle smile. "She's having a good day, very present, asking for specific details about the ceremony." Martha's health had stabilized over the past year, her dementia progression slowed by new medications and the reduced stress following the resolution of decades-old secrets. She now split her time between a luxury care facility in Chicago and the guest house behind Jasmine's new residence in Pinewood Falls. The relationship between them had deepened beyond their coincidental first meeting, evolving into a genuine bond that bridged generations and healed historical wounds. The grand opening ceremony began at noon, with Jasmine cutting a blue ribbon stretched across the entrance to Winters Square. As cameras flashed and applause erupted from the assembled crowd, she caught sight of Maya's beaming face in the front row, her friend having flown in from California, where she now managed a thriving coffee shop chain. Walter stood at Martha's side, supporting her frail form as she witnessed the culmination of justice delayed but finally delivered. "I have an announcement to make," Walter stated when it was his turn to address the gathering. Richards Enterprises is proud to establish the Eliza Winters Scholarship for aspiring designers from historically marginalized communities. The endowment will ensure that talent is recognized and nurtured, regardless of background or circumstance. Jasmine blinked back tears, surprised by the gesture despite Walter's many demonstrations of commitment to making amends for historical injustice. As creative director of the Winters Legacy brand under Richards Enterprises, she had found her professional voice and platform, but this tribute to her grandmother held special significance. Later, as the celebration continued, Martha beckoned Jasmine to join her at a quiet table away from the main crowd. "I have something for you," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Something I should have returned long ago." From her handbag, Martha withdrew a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. "Your grandmother's letters to me," she explained. "We corresponded in secret for years after she left Pinewood Falls. I tried to return her property documentation to her, papers that proved the Winters family's ownership, but by then she had grown distrustful of anything connected to this town." Martha's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "The last letter came after your mother's birth. Eliza wrote that she was determined her daughter would never know the pain of Pinewood Falls, that she would build a new legacy elsewhere." Jasmine accepted the letters with trembling hands. "I never knew she maintained any connection to this place," she admitted. "She rarely spoke of Vermont at all." Martha nodded understanding. The wounds were deep. "When your mother passed away, Walter and I attended the funeral anonymously. We saw you there, just a teenager, but already showing Eliza's spirit and dignity. Walter recognized something in you even then. He began researching the Winters family descendants, hoping someday to make things right." The revelation that Walter had known of her existence years before their supposed coincidental meeting might once have angered Jasmine, but now it simply completed a circle she had come to see as destined. "He could have told me from the beginning," she observed, without rancor. "Truthfully, I'm not sure you would have believed me," Walter replied, joining their conversation. "Or trusted my intentions. I needed you to establish yourself first, to know your own value before learning the historical connection between our families." That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the ceremonial aspects concluded, Jasmine hosted a more intimate gathering at the community center built on land that had once housed her grandmother's childhood home. There, she conducted the first session of a free sewing class for local children, a diverse group ranging in age from 8 to 16, all eager to learn skills that connected practical craftsmanship with artistic expression. As the children worked on their first projects, simple tote bags embellished with personalized designs, Martha entered the classroom, moving slowly but purposefully toward Jasmine. In her hands she carried a golden box inlaid with mother of pearl. "This belongs to you now," Martha said, presenting the box to Jasmine with ceremonial gravity. "It contains your grandmother's original design sketches, the ones she created before leaving Pinewood Falls. Richard recovered them from my father's possessions after his death. I've kept them safe all these years, waiting for the right moment to bring them home." Inside the ornate box lay dozens of yellowed sketches, evidence of Eliza Winters' remarkable talent and vision, preserved across decades of separation and loss. The designs displayed a sophistication and artistic sensibility that transcended their era, revealing the legacy of creativity that had flowed through generations to find expression in Jasmine's own work. The evening's final surprise came from Walter, who presented Jasmine with a leather portfolio containing legal documents. The deed to the entire historic district, he explained as she examined the papers. Now protected in perpetuity from development or alteration without approval from a board comprising descendants of the original black business owners. He smiled at the children working diligently at their sewing machines. "Your grandmother's legacy isn't just in fabric and thread, but in resilience and justice that outlasted those who sought to erase it." As twilight settled over Pinewood Falls, a town now confronting its complicated history while working toward a more inclusive future, Jasmine stood in the doorway of the community center that bore her grandmother's name. Around her, the restored buildings of the once thriving black business district stood as testaments to both historical injustice and contemporary reconciliation. The journey from that snowy night when she'd offered shelter to a confused elderly woman to this moment of triumph and healing seemed simultaneously improbable and inevitable, a testament to how single acts of kindness could sometimes spark transformative change, reaching across generations. Inside the center, Martha sat surrounded by children, telling stories of the Pinewood Falls she had known in her youth, stories that had been absent from official histories but would now be preserved for future generations. Walter stood nearby, the weight of his family's complicated legacy balanced by his commitment to restorative justice. "We saw you there, just a teenager, but already showing Eliza's spirit and dignity. Walter recognized something in you even then." He began researching the Winters family descendants, hoping someday to make things right. The revelation that Walter had known of her existence years before their supposed coincidental meeting might once have angered Jasmine, but now it simply completed a circle she had come to see as destined. If this story of perseverance against discrimination inspired you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice and building bridges across generations. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can change lives in ways we never expect. Thank you for joining us on this journey from hardship to hope. May we all find the courage to stand for justice and healing in our own communities. This powerful narrative teaches us that kindness can ripple through generations, creating opportunities for healing and justice. When Jasmine helped Martha that snowy night, she couldn't have imagined it would unlock the truth about her family's stolen legacy. The story reveals how systemic racism operates not just through obvious discrimination, but through economic dispossession that affects generations. The Montgomery's theft of black-owned property created wealth disparities that persisted for decades. We learn that confronting painful history requires courage but brings liberation. Both Walter and Martha demonstrated that acknowledging family wrongdoing is essential for genuine reconciliation. Their willingness to face uncomfortable truths helped break cycles of inherited prejudice. The story also shows how talent flourishes despite barriers. Jasmine's extraordinary skills were consistently appropriated or minimized until she gained the platform to showcase them authentically. Perhaps most importantly, we see that true justice requires both acknowledgement and restoration. Walter didn't just apologize, he returned what was taken and created systems to prevent future discrimination. The transformation of Pinewood Falls demonstrates that communities can evolve when they honestly confront their histories of exclusion. Finally, the story reminds us that our lives interconnect in ways we cannot predict. Martha and Eliza's friendship across racial lines planted seeds of justice that would bloom decades later through their descendants. Has an act of kindness ever changed the course of your life in unexpected ways? Or have you witnessed discrimination that went unchallenged? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Jasmine's journey from struggling seamstress to champion of justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people discover this story. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about overcoming adversity and standing up against injustice. If you know someone who needs inspiration or a reminder that small acts of compassion can lead to transformative change, share this video with them today. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through generations of struggle and triumph. May we all find the courage to extend kindness, even when it's difficult, and work toward healing the wounds of historical injustice in our own communities.